Listening Fanfiction presents The Women Who Love Harry Potter by Ricardian scholar Clark Weasley, based on the book series Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling, narrated for you by Sierra Feast. Lily Potter. He was her baby boy, and there was suddenly no one else in the world that she loved more. He had her eyes, big green emeralds, behind James' messy black hair, a little piece of her inside of James. It was a beautiful sight to see, and she adored it all. She was the most devoted mother you could ask for. Anything her baby boy needed, she would get it to him immediately. She focused all her attention on him and his father, him more than the father. She would give her life for him. And she did. She pleaded and begged to be killed instead, and that love, devotion, and sacrifice saved her baby. She watched over him, furious of the treatment he received from family, Ron Weasley's jealousy, classmates, teachers, Sam, the government. They all treated him badly and didn't deserve him at all. She was called from the land of the dead to walk his final steps with him. She watched him hungrily. He was her little boy, the baby she longed to hold in her arms again. There was no one else she could love more. Minerva McGonagall. She had loved James Potter all his life when she had been named his godmother. She loved Harry Potter equally as much when James placed the child into her arms. He was the spitting image of James apart from the eyes. They were Lily's eyes. She was the second person he ever walked to, Sirius being the first, much to James' disappointment, just to show he could do it because James told him she would be his teacher one day. She had been his grandmother in everything but blood and name, giving him sweets, playing with him, and so proud to watch this baby grow. She watched over Privet Drive and made a poor attempt to argue against him being placed there, because who could say no to Albus Dumbledore? She watched him grow up in her cat form, purring at the tender strokes and cuddles he gave her at Miss Figg's home. She was bursting with pride when he was sorted into Gryffindor at the seeker position and saved Hermione Granger, her second favorite student, because Harry would always have number one in his year from the troll. She spent a lot of her savings for the Nimbus 2000 as a birthday/Christmas present to make up for all the ones she had missed and would continue to miss. She spent a night by his bedside when he almost died to protect the stone. She apologized and cried for him, but could never do it to his face in case he would try to take advantage. Just an excuse, really. She was too frightened he would hate her for leaving him and ignoring him on so many occasions. She was close to breaking, giving in, and hugging him when he looked so terrified during second year. She was prouder than ever when he fought Dementors and won the Quidditch Cup, hugging him and crying in happiness. She guarded him carefully and screamed at Albus for the Triwizard Tournament, and she swore vengeance against Umbridge when she saw the scars on the back of his hand. Sixth year, she saw him take leadership, and she swore he looked a little like Albus, his eyes sparkling brightly. Seventh year was the worst. He was killed, and every repressed feeling came out in a scream of horror, self-hatred, and love and grief. Bellatrix laughed, and you know who taunted. She held up her wand and fought for the boy she loved so dearly, the son of the man who was practically her son. She fought for and loved passionately her grandson. Alice Longbottom. He was almost a son to her. Nothing like Neville, her most treasured person, was to her, but he still had a place in her heart. He was her godson, and though she was never the most dominant in his heart, Sirius, James, and Lily took most of it. He always had a smile for her, a lovely, bright smile that she loved. She cried when she couldn't look after him. Dumbledore refused, and she was desperate to hold the baby in her arms with Neville and reassure them she'd keep them safe. She never got to keep them safe. Bellatrix made sure of that. But she loved him. She loved her son more. And she stood there staring at the two grown men that looked like James with green eyes and the male darker version of herself stand in her ward, and she loved them both. If only she could say so without her mouth making strange noises. Petunia Dursley. She loved him a little. Underneath all that hate, jealousy, and fear, underneath the exaggerated pampering for her husband and son, she loved him a little. She must have loved him a little, or those blood words would never have worked. Arabella Figg. He was so small, so polite, and so desperate for someone to love him. He sat there quietly on her sofa, listening to her prattle about her cats, and giving said cats the attention they deserve. He was fragile and never loved properly, and she wished she could give him that love he needed, but the Dursleys would have never let him stay with her if she did. But she said well done when he did well. She slipped him a piece of cake near his birthday, even if it was a little stale, because she brought it days before, not sure when she'll see him again. She told him to get better when he was ill, and when he spent the night on Dursley holidays, she would always tuck him into bed, and when she was sure he was asleep, she kissed him goodnight on the forehead. She was practically a mother to him, in a confused and messed up sense. She watched him go to Hogwarts with her heart burning with pride, knowing he'd be a fine wizard like his father. Hermione Granger. He jumped on the back of a troll, shoved his wand up its nose, and tried to hold it down while Ron cursed it. He was her defender, friend, and she loved him, only second to Ron. He was her only hope when she saw the yellow eyes in the mirror, her break in her heart when he chose the broom over her, and then the cement that sealed it back together when he held her as she cried. He was her biggest worry as he faced dragons, mermaids, monsters, fangirls, and Voldemort. He was her leader in an army, her soul cover when Ron was being an idiot. Her shattered heart when Hagrid walked in with Harry's body in his arms. Her rebirth when he killed Voldemort and wanted to spend the first few hours of peace with only her and Ron. The uncle to her children, the protector to them, and second father. Her marriage counselor when things get tough, and her second biggest supporter for reform. She loved him. She loved Ron a little more. She was the happiest woman there was. Gryffindor Chasers. He was the baby of the team. The twins, Angelina and Alicia were 13, Oliver 14, and Kate 12. So Harry, at the age of 11, was the baby. They adored him completely. They threatened and beat Oliver up after the incident with the plunger. They cried and almost had their hairs turned white when he fell 50 feet in the air because of the Dementors. They supported him fully and hit anyone who had the Butter Stinks badges when he was in the Triwizard Tournament, and they willingly, without any hesitation, signed the Dumbledore's Army sheet. They fought for him, hurt people for him, cried for him. Because that's what big sisters do, and the Gryffindor Quidditch team is filled with sibling love. Puppy Pomfrey. He was so tiny and innocent when he first came to her hospital wing. Albus Dumbledore had fitted him in his arms easily, the legs hanging over and his head resting on the elderly man's shoulder. She watched over him for the 2 days he was unconscious, and she loved the innocence she could see within him. She never loved many of the students. She felt they purposely put themselves in danger with their pride over blood and stupidity. But Harry was often in her hospital wing because someone was trying to kill him. Because he was a hero. Similar to the fact Remus Lupin was only ever in her hospital wing because of his lycanthropy. He was polite, apologetic, and gave her the sweetest smile she had ever seen. He never complained about the medicine, only caused chaos over Sirius Black, and looked the most happiest when his dearest friends were to visit him. He was never rude about being stuck in bed or her restrictions. He would talk to her and ask her about herself and profession. He would treat her as more than something ruining his fun. Of course she loved him. He was her favorite patient. Molly Weasley. It appears almost every time she first met him, he would look at her with wide-eyed terror. In the train station as a lost soul trying to find the right platform, on the platform waiting to be picked up by his relatives, and then the first day at the Burrow. He stared with wide, frightened emeralds, as if she was going to knock him out with her frying pan. She smothered him a little. He wasn't fed properly or given proper love, and therefore unused to having a family like hers. He was in constant danger and was traumatized at a young age, and therefore needed a protector. He was fighting a war whether she liked it or not, and there was nothing she could do about it. Somewhere along the line, the friendliness and charity for Ron's friend turned into a mother's love for a seventh son that she never knew she had. Ginny Weasley. She grew up listening to his story and loving the hero she created in her mind. She saw him before her first year and thought him to be the most handsome, considerate boy she had ever met. But since the only boys she ever knew were her brothers, it really didn't mean anything. Tom took control, and she was terrified. She woke up in a dank, dark blaze, a giant monster dead on the floor, and Harry covered in blood. He held her as she cried and defended her from the bullies who thought she should be expelled in last couple weeks of school. He stopped being Harry Potter boy who lived hero and became her own personal hero, Harry. He didn't notice her much, but she noticed everything about him. She learned every expression and which foods he liked and what he truly enjoyed doing. She began to love him because he was a man called Harry who liked treacle tarts, adored his pet owl, passionate about flying, and loved his friends more than anything. She loved his touch when he held her as a woman. She leaned into his kisses and felt the strongest wave of love. She compared him secretly to other boys she had dated, Neville, Michael, and Dean, and knew Harry to be the most handsome and considerate man she had ever met. She was overjoyed to have his children, to be chosen to be his life companion, to hold him in his worst nightmares, and be pulled into his arms at his most happiest moments. She knew she could never be truly first in his heart when Hermione and Ron got there first, but she was his, and he was hers. She was in love with him. Fleur Delacour. He was nothing to her at first. A small boy that was shoved in a competition that he shouldn't be in. Then she heard the stories about him, saw him fly, heard him defend Hagrid, and thanked him for saving her little sister. And then she loved him. She saw the hero within him, the brave boy that fought every obstacle and had no care for himself, the man that won the war. The modesty and sweetness in him made him more lovable. She adored him for his defense of her, that he was determined to see happy with her life mate Bill, and was grateful for whatever little thing she did for him, whether it was an invite to dinner, or just a little advice on something. He was her favorite brother-in-law. Luna Lovegood. She always knew she loved him, because there was no one else apart from Neville who was so kind to her. She loved his open-mindedness, as he sat there and listened to every word she said, and never scolded or made fun of her. She loved that he always apologized if loony came out of his lips, because he was truly ashamed of himself. He loved that he somewhat understood her, understood the love magic and the death and what magic is really like. She loved his unwavering support for her father's magazine and loved him for helping her reconcile with her father after his betrayal. She loved going to his home and being welcomed as if she lived there. She loved that his daughter was called Lily Luna, because it proved he loved her just as much. He was her family, and she loved him more than she could understand. Cho Chang. She loved him, sort of. She thinks. She's not sure. She was in love with Cedric, and then she loved Harry. Did she? He was sort of good-looking, talented, powerful, and kind. He was there for her when she needed a shoulder to cry on, and her heart beat a little faster if he looked her way, smiled at her, took her hand. But it all fell to pieces, and she could never look at him in the eye properly, could never get over the guilt that came from kissing him that one time before Christmas. She loved him, didn't she? Gryffindor Tonks. Her cousin's baby. That was her nickname for him, that she never spoke out loud. Sirius adored Harry and would never shut up about him before she even met the kid. So part of her loved him before because this was Sirius's heart, his most precious thing, and anything that helped her poor cousin who was locked in a house of nightmares was something to be loved. She loved his determination and strength on the battlefield. She loved his convincing words and ability to reach out to her idiot of a husband and get him to return home. She trusted him enough to be the godfather to her child. As she watches with her beloved husband, father, and cousin, she loves Harry even more when he is always 2 steps behind Teddy to support and love the little boy she left behind. Lily Luna Potter. He was her daddy, the most important man in her life. She learned to walk so she could run into his arms when he comes home from work. She learned to talk so she could tell him how much she loves him. She learned to draw so she could draw her family for him. She learned to write so she could write letters to him and tell him about her life and how much she loves him. But then she met this boy, fell in love, and wanted to marry him. And suddenly, her daddy was no longer the most important man in her life. She cried a little to him, and he just laughed, held her, and told her that he'll just be her second most important man. She kissed his cheek when he gave her away on her wedding day and said the 4 words that always made him smile brightly. I love you, Daddy. End of The Women Who Love Harry Potter. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening.